All right, so more elasticities of demand. Let's go. I'm a bit tired of the topic too, but it will be over shortly. So the other question is, how is this relevant to government? How is this relevant to government policy and specifically taxation? So governments, they like to tax things, they like to raise revenue so that they can do things that they decide are important. They tax goods and services, and they tax the sale of them. So imagine that I have a good which is very price elastic. So a change in the price will very largely affect my quantity, right? If the price goes up a bit, then the amount that people want of this good will massively fall. So if I'm taxing something, if I'm taxing the supply of something, well, let's say this is the supply curve, and I plonk a tax on top. Well, I'm going to be pushing up the price by the amount of the tax. And if I have a very elastic, like price elastic demand curve for this graph, then that's going to cause a massive reduction in the quantity sold. That's going to mean two things. One, it's going to cause a huge loss in the amount of economic activity because, hey, look, people are buying a lot less. So we call that a deadweight loss, which is going to be another topic, but hurts economic activity. That's bad. Also bad for government is because a lot less is being sold, they're not making that much revenue. So if this gap is the amount by which they've pushed up the price, then that's the tax. That's the amount that the government's getting. So they're getting this amount in tax for every unit sold, but they've cut the units from here down to here because this is where the new supply curve, including the cost of the tax, intersects the demand, the amount that people are willing to pay for different quantities. And so because it's all the way down here, well, they're getting this amount in purple. They're getting this amount in revenue for every good that they sell, and they're selling this smaller quantity. So the total tax that they get is this quantity along here times by the revenue along here. It's this rectangle, which is not that much compared to if the quantity was out here, because then they would be selling for the same amount of tax but by a lot more units. And that's exactly what they get for a price inelastic good. So a price inelastic good, if you remember, it's very steep because a change in the price only has so the price has gone up, takes a very big increase in price to drop the quantity. Or a small increase in price is going to have basically zero effect on quantity. So here, if I have my supply curve and then the government plonks on a tax, it's had a very small effect on the amount of quantity that's actually sold by plonking on this tax. And so increasing the costs that producers have to pay, and therefore they have to increase the price that they demand from the consumer. But it's had a small effect. This increase in price has only slightly shifted down the quantity from here to here. So this means that when the government's working out how much revenue does it get, well, again, this gap is the amount of tax that it's getting for each good, the amount that it's increased the price by. But it's multiplying that out by, it's getting that amount of tax on all of these goods that are still being sold. So that's a lot more revenue than in the other case, where it's the comparatively small revenue, comparatively small rectangle as well. So here we have more revenue for government. Plus, it's also hurt the amount that's being traded. Hey, look, there's still a lot being traded. That's cool. So typically we would say governments will prefer to tax more the more price inelastic a good is. Now, obviously, there are problems with this. Maybe not obviously, but there can be problems with this because necessities are price inelastic. So if you tax them more, then you're likely going to be hurting poorer people more. which obviously has its kind of ethical concerns, it's got its own economic concerns, and just not good for inequality, and maybe not very fair, etc. But it is a way of getting revenue, and particularly governments like this when it comes to things like tobacco, because they don't like people having tobacco anyway. But if you're addicted to tobacco, you're still going to buy it. So your demand might be quite inelastic for something you're addicted to. And the government goes, whoopee, we get to punish people for being addicted to bad stuff. And we get a lot of government money for it. And governments often say, yep, that sounds great, let's do that. And here we have it. So that's governments will typically be more keen to put an indirect tax, where it's the tax on the sale of a good, on a good that's price inelastic in demand, than for the price that's elastic, because they get more money and it reduces it affects the amount being sold less, so it has a lower effect on economic inactivity.